Many years ago, when I was just a little tater tot, every blue moon, my two older brothers, Devin and Preston, and I would have Brother Night. What was Brother Night, you ask? It was always a surprise. Some nights we would have sword fights, others we would have lightsaber fights, or pillow fights, or Twizzler fights, or sock fights, or carrot fights, or just fights. Mostly, Brother Nights were just spur of the moment events that only transpired when our parents wanted to do something really boring and wanted to drag us along. But Preston, my oldest brother, saved us from boredom and doom by saying, "Sorry guys, but we've had this Brother Night on the calendar for a while now and we can't go, sorry." But during this particular Brother Night, my parents didn't want us to fight because I always found a way to get hurt and cry. So we settled on watching a movie. But before my parents walked out the door, they mentioned that they would be bringing back food and not to eat until they got back. So we chose to watch Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the best movie to watch when you're told you're not allowed to eat. Not 30 minutes go by and I'm already caving to the insatiable desire to consume anything edible. So I kindly asked Preston if he would get me a snack and he said, no. Then I kindly asked Devin if he would get me a snack and he said, nope. So my only other option was to get a snack myself. I made a mental note of where I was sitting so when I came back I would have a cozy crater to sink into. I stepped into the kitchen and what my searching eyes fell upon made my heart skip a beat. I was dumbfounded to see a large glass bowl filled with chocolate syrup. My dreams had come true. My tiny body was drawn to the spectacle, and before I knew it, I was hovering over the bowl with a scooping hand ready. My hand submerged into the delightful, sugary concoction, and out it came, burdened by the weight of pure cocoa. With a cautious look to the left and the right, I stuffed my whole hand in my mouth, and immediately realized my mistake. So it wasn't chocolate, it was paint. Gagging and spluttering, I stumbled to a neatly organized stack of napkins. Violently, I seized the mass of napkins and began to excavate the bitter chemical taste from my mouth. When I realized that the napkins were only making my tongue dry, I unleashed the floodgates of the sink. I drowned my tongue under the cleansing waters of the dishwasher sink until I switched back to napkins, then back to the sink. Back and forth I went until the taste was mostly out of my mouth. Small lakes and piles of napkins were littered all across the floor. It was in that moment Mom and Dad came home. I quickly raced across the floor, cleaning up all I could when they finally walked in carrying to-go boxes full of Thai fried rice. I had cleverly covered up my failure, but I had completely lost my appetite. Because of my disobedience, instead of a belly full of good food, I got a mouthful of nasty, bitter paint. Now, obedience is something that God takes very seriously. But why? Let's take a look at this story in the book of Genesis, and we'll learn that the consequences for disobedience can be a whole lot worse than a bitter mouth. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, he also made this garden in the land of Eden. And he created Adam and Eve, the first humans, to work the garden and to take care of it. Now, the Garden of Eden was what some may call a paradise. When you were hungry, you could just thrust your hand skyward and you would grasp a delicious fruit. When you were tired, just find a lion and use his mane as a pillow. If you were bored, you weren't, because you were in flippin' Eden. And on top of it all, you could go on walks through the garden with God. Imagine that. But there was one very important rule that God told Adam. You're allowed to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of knowing good and bad, or you will certainly die. And of course, they obeyed God and trusted him, but they were always subconsciously drawn to that forbidden tree. One afternoon, Adam and Eve made their way to that tree, and they sat in pleasant conversation underneath the boughs of the forbidden tree. Suddenly, their eyes caught hold of a snake slithering in the branches. But they ignored the slithering creature and continued their conversation until unexpectedly, did God really say you can't eat from any tree in the garden? Okay, so the scriptures up until this point never mention talking animals, so it's easy to assume that they never encountered a talking animal before. But for some reason, Eve is so chill about this, and she's like, what? It's just a talking snake. Don't be rude. No, we can eat from any tree, just not this one. Because if you eat it, or even touch it, you'll die. Right, Adam? Well, you won't die. God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be open, and you'll be like God, knowing good from bad. In the end, it really didn't take much convincing for Eve to take a bite. She then passed it to Adam, and he ate as well. Then they realized that they were butt naked, so they hid in some bushes and cobbled together some leaf clothes for themselves. It was in that moment that they heard God calling out for them. Hey, where are y'all? I want to go on a walk. I heard you walking, so I hid because I was naked. Did you eat from the tree I told you specifically not to eat from? Well, the woman you gave me offered me some fruit from who knows where, and I happened to eat it. What did you do? Well, the snake tricked me, and I ate the fruit. But Adam and Eve did something a whole lot worse than eat some fruit. They brought sin and death into the world. Now God, with a heavy heart, had to exile Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden and into the wilderness. But God didn't abandon them, and he gave them a promise that one day one of their sons would rise up and crush the snake's head, but the snake would also bite the man in his heel. See, God didn't want Adam and Eve to suffer, and that's not his goal for us either. But God sees the big picture, and that's why he wants us to trust him and to be obedient. In Deuteronomy 5:33, it says, "Walk in obedience to all that the Lord has commanded you, so that you may live and prosper and prolong your days in the land that you will possess." God simply wants us to live a full life and to prosper. So here's the challenge. Let's be obedient to God, because after all, he wants what's best for us. But know that there definitely will be times when you stumble and fall. But keep in mind, just like how God didn't abandon Adam and Eve and me, he won't abandon you ever because he loves you. And I believe that your greatest adventure is ahead.